Hey, I'm about to shake things up today. I hope you're ready for this. I don't usually go this route, but I guess I feel led to, so I'm going to go. So turn me loose today. Man, I got to tell you, I wonder, as do many of you, what is going on within the four walls of many mega churches that are out there. Not all, and maybe even small ones, but I feel like the pastoral community at large, with the exception of a few, and namely the pastor that I serve underneath, is not in this bucket. But I want to cast a net that's fairly broad toward a lot of those pastors that are in mega churches that, quite frankly, I believe are within a conflict in their own head, in their own heart, in their own building. I believe they're in a conflict within themselves on what to deliver, what message to deliver, and what topics are off limits. And I got to say, we as people want to hear the real stuff. We as people don't like fluff. We like transparent pastors who authentically deliver a message about their life in real terms. Yes, with tact and diplomacy, but in real terms, in real style, in real vernacular. We appreciate messages that are articulated in a ground level way, a real way. Again, I always go back to, why do we have to make such a big deal about people who are authentic? Why aren't we just defaulting to authenticity? But the messages that are authentic and real and not covered with smoke and lights and fluff in the church of all places should be the one place that we can go and feel secure that we will get the real meat and potatoes, not the fancy package with the plastic inside. Um, Again, I know there's some pastors and teachers and preachers and churches that do it right. Thankfully, in South Texas, I see a lot of ones that are doing it right. There are those exceptions, but still, I want to make sure I compartmentalize and qualify that this message today, this podcast today, is about those of you pastors or people who know pastors who are avoiding sticky subjects. They're avoid stepping in the pile, the steaming pile, if you will, with a stench, an odor, and just a, you know, unattraction. So those piles I'm going to go in today, of the steaming piles that we don't want to step in as pastors, we, them. Uh, so today's title is Polarize the Pulpit. Yeah, I want to know why, and we're going to dive into this, but I want to know why we can't talk about polarizing topics from the pulpit. I got a couple of qualifiers for you here at the beginning, a couple of W's. I got a why, a what, and a who. So let's build the framework. Get out your nail gun, pour the slab. Let's get our materials ready, and let's build a framework here, a foundation for the talk today. Why not talk about polarizing topics? Abortion, transgenderization, gay pride, race, masculinity, in a deep dive, because I know that some touch on topics like masculinity, but I don't believe, because they feel like it is too laser focused to the congregation, that it only appeals to certain people. So we don't want to talk about those things and, alienate the rest of the group, which is a mistake. So I'm going to say that these topics don't get talked about enough. Why not? I think we all know, and you're saying the answer to yourself right now as you're listening. You're saying, well, because of fear, right? They don't want to rub anybody the wrong way. We're in a world where friction is bad. We're in a world where anything different than our opinion or viewpoint is the enemy. And so, of all people, pastors are fearful of pissing people off. And I understand that's not our goal. They don't want to stand up there and drive people away, obviously. But there's a way to talk about things that are real issues, because look at it this way. I look at it like disciplining our children. If we don't do it in a healthy but firm, stern way to correct and train, if we don't do that, guess what? Somebody's going to when they get outside the four walls of our home. So if we don't hear the message of a polarizing topic from the pulpit in a way that's biblical, scriptural, done with grace and taste and diplomacy, if we don't get that, I take away but diplomacy, throw diplomacy out. I don't really care about that. But scripturally and graciously delivered, if we don't get that from the pulpit, guess what? We're going to get it from somewhere else. Just like our kids, we don't discipline them and train them and correct them. They're going to go into the world. They're going to have a professor that does it. They're going to have a job that does it, a spouse that does it. If they're going to get away with things because of us denying that responsibility of disciplining our kids, someone else is going to get out there in the real world and it's going to look different. It's going to taste bitter to our children, right? So I'm getting off on this tangent, but I'm comparing to the fact that if we don't discipline our kids, somebody will down the line, and it's going to be bad for them. The penitentiary might. Okay. So pastor doesn't tell us the truth in a regard of polarizing topics like abortion, race, transgender, gay pride, those things. I'm not going to keep listing those. You get where I'm going with those polarizing topics, politics even, and that's a fine line in and of itself. But I will say someone's going to give us that information, and we're going to get it really tainted. It's going to come to us really skewed, really poisoned and manipulated a lot of times. So wouldn't I want to hear that from a guy that is trained to teach from the Bible and knows scripturally how to back that up? I would. I hope you would. I hope you're nodding your head right now. Why else do we not talk about it? Okay, we talk about fear, that the pastor's afraid that he's going to piss people off. What about the cultural narrative? Right? We get so much of that cultural narrative jammed down our throat that either the pastor is getting it and doesn't know how to filter and deliver. Maybe he's just taking and absorbing and consuming just like the congregation. So we're all just cattle that are going along with this cultural narrative. So maybe it's not even, to some pastors, maybe it's not worth the fight. Maybe it's not worth their time to stand up there and try to contradict everything we get before we walk in the doors on social media, on the news, from friends, employers. So maybe that's a reason why not. Maybe that's why we don't hear enough about those topics. Cultural narrative, man. It's that spoonful of medicine that we just can't stomach, but we still consume it and digest it, unfortunately, even though it turns our stomach. So the next one I would say on the 3 W's of this is what. So we did why, but what about what? What's the cost? If I'm a pastor and I want to really dive into some of these topics from the pulpit, and I want to get people well informed from a biblical standpoint, if I want to empower them to make right decisions, and if I really and truly at my heart, in my heart, I want to counteract some of this other toxicity that the world's feeding our flock, if I'm a pastor. So, but what's my cost of doing that? Well, losing the congregation, obviously. Talked about that a second ago. That kind of goes with fear, but am I afraid? So during COVID, it was hard enough to make ends meet, to get people in the door, to entice folks to come to church during a pandemic. It's hard enough to pay bills. Churches are businesses too. So it's hard enough during the last 2 years, but do I really want to choose that battle? Do I really want to pick that conflict potentially by talking about something that might drive people away? Right? That tithe, that offering, that donation financially, just from a service standpoint, am I going to lose volunteers? What's going to happen if I go this route and I start rubbing people with these topics the wrong way? So that's a big concern for me if I'm a pastor. But if I'm a pastor that's doing what he's called to do, tell the truth, and in its entirety, like not just cherry pick the truth and topics, but inform our flock so that we can go out and do the ultimate mission, which is make disciples of all nations, spreading the word. So if that's my goal and that's the end game, then I shouldn't care if my message is risky. You might be pleasantly surprised that some of the congregation you think you're going to lose might actually consider that refreshing to hear for a change about these topics. And then what's the cost also is division within the church. You're going to draw a line in the sand. You're going to choose a hill to die on a topic. And then you're going to have people choose sides. It's inevitable. We're people. But it goes back to what foundation you laid before that. You can't allow and enable division and then come at the pulpit, off the pulpit, with a message that's even more polarizing, that's going to even fan that flame and add fuel to the fire in that regard. So that's a risk if you didn't do it right on the front end. So thank God I go to a church where it's done right on the front end. Could we hear some more of these polarizing topics? Yeah, but I will say our pastor, our pastor does. He does dip a toe in the water, take a step in those directions to talk a little bit on the surface level about some of these topics. He doesn't get granular with a fine-tooth comb, but he will answer any questions we have. And that's what I love. But for those that are afraid to even broach the subject, they're afraid of division. They're afraid of losing congregation. We shouldn't be afraid of that division if, just like back to parenting, if we've on the front end, we've trained our kids, we've shown them things and educated them and poured those values and principles into them, I shouldn't be afraid for them to go out into the public and be influenced in that way because they've got a foundation. So am I worried? Are they susceptible? Yeah, they're susceptible to being influenced or swayed off of that foundation. But the goal is to make them unshakable by pouring those deep roots at home. Just like at a church, we pour those deep roots in our leadership, in the congregation. These topics that are sticky and make you shift in your seat a little bit might be uncomfortable. Those shouldn't divide us. So then the last one here on the W's, and then I'll dig into 3 of what I consider the crux of this talk. Again, we're polarizing the pulpit today. And the last one on this W's, so we did why, we did what, we got who. So who wins, right? If we fold, if we are cowarding down to the cultural narrative, like I talked about, and we just don't want to get in those weeds of those topics. If we fold our tent, we got a chance to be all in with our chips, or we fold. If we fold, then I believe our enemy, he wins, number one, but he's deterring this discussion. The enemy is a professional liar, and he's not a professional because he's bad at lying. He's a professional because he's savvy and he's developed his craft. So he knows how to twist the Bible, the truth. He knows how to put gray areas in things. He knows how to create like this doubt beyond a reasonable doubt, right? We talk about in the courtroom. He just has to create reasonable doubt within us. So if he can do that, if we're afraid and worried about the division in the church or the cultural narrative and opposition with us, and we're fearful to deliver these kinds of messages, then the enemy wins. He has deterred our discussions. He has deterred us from approaching those topics of discomfort. But guess what? We're having those conversations other places. We like to walk in the church and just feel like we're walking into a buffer, a bubble. We like to feel this padded environment because we're going to get a feel good message. We're going to get some feel good music. And then we're going to walk away feeling better, at least probably by the time we get to the car anyway. But then again, we flip on the channel, we pick up our phone, we're going to get realness from some source or another, and they're going to be talking about the things we should have heard our pastor talking about and giving us a biblical stance and perspective. So that's what I see. Like, who wins? Well, if we fold and we don't have those talks, we don't have those conversations, we don't get that message from the pulpit, then the enemy has won because he's deterred us from even talking about it in our little bubble of the church, the four walls anyway. That could be a whole other topic about church and are we the church? Do we go to church? What, two different contexts. But so the who wins if we rise up? Who wins if we put all our chips in the middle of the table as pastors talking to you? Even as leaders, it's our responsibility to go to these pastors and say, hey, why don't we talk about these things? What's the downside? What are we afraid of? What can we do as leaders in the church, the lay people that are volunteering? What can we do to reinforce and support your message and get the team on board here and help be really a buffer to the division? We can mitigate that in the congregation if we got the right leaders and we're not allowing the gossip and the toxicity and the poison to travel throughout our building and our people. So what if we rise up? Who wins? It fuels the flock. It recharges us. It gets us calibrated and in line with Scripture, with God's viewpoints, with our senior pastor who's the shepherd of the flock. It gets us aligned with all of those people if we rise up and everybody's a part of getting this message out on a Sunday. So these topics deserve to be talked about. The people in the congregation, the flock, deserves to be fueled by a healthy conversation in regards to those topics. So, all right. Hey, I hope you're with us now. You can see this building taking shape that we're having today in the conversation. We've poured the slab, built the foundation. We built a framework. Here we go. Going right in head first. What I call 3 barriers to deploying pulpit bombshells. So these are the barriers, right? I'm not going to tell you how we should deliver the message. I'm not a pastor. All right. I'm in ministry. There's an aha moment, light bulb goes on with you right now that you're in ministry too. We're all in ministry, but I'm not a pastor. There's a 5-fold ministry, right? Pastors, prophets, evangelists, teachers, apostles, all, those are 5. We're all in ministry. We're one of those. But the pastor, I'm not that. So I'm not going to tell you what all those messages should sound like about race and abortion and transgender people and, vaccine mandates and just those kinds of gay pride. I'm not going to tell you what those should sound like. That's the pastor's job, to get a word from God and apply Scripture to that message. But the 3 barriers, what I see to why we don't deploy more of those pulpit bombshells that I call them, right? Let's go into that. One, I'm going to say we got a complex of Superman versus Clark Kent. I feel like we got, from the pastoral role, we've got guys who think they have to be Superman or appear to be Superman. They feel like when they get up on the stage, they got to have the cape on. We can't see the real Clark Kent behind the Superman. So I'm not a comic guy. I'm not a Marvel guy. I'm not a whatever the other one is. I don't even know. See, this is where I'm at, right? So I'm not into all that. But Superman and Clark Kent, I get it. They've been around forever. I watched cartoons. But the pastors have an image. that they're afraid of tarnishing, or they don't want us to necessarily see behind the curtain and get their real perspective as people. They're people before they're pastors. So we got to see a little bit more of the Clark Kent than we do the Superman if we're going to cover these topics. But I think that's the barrier, is pastors have a perception of our perception. They think our perception is we want to see the superhero on stage that, raises his voice and goes into Old English and King James and yea, verily, thus, hence saith the Lord. Like they think we want to hear all this, and that's not what we want to hear. Your congregation doesn't want to hear that. That's my opinion. Thank you for that. God bless America. I can say that. But anyway, I think we need to see more Clark Kents from the pulpit. The real guy in the horn rimmed glasses that's, he's just a guy. That's what I want to see. Thankfully, I feel like I've got that in our church. Our senior pastor, he's very real about who he is, who he was, who he wants to be. He doesn't feel the need to wear a cape, and I respect that, and I will walk through fire for that guy. So that's the first barrier to this bombshell that we're afraid to deliver from the pulpit. Second one is culture is our kryptonite. The culture as kryptonite is this big piece of green kryptonite that is the culture that is standing out glaringly to our pastor population. Not all, but some, and a lot, I would say, a lot of those pastors view culture as kryptonite. So we can't push the envelope. We can't stretch that rubber band as far as it'll go in regards to culture and whether or not we're willing to go against mainstream. We're willing to go against the majority to some degree. I say majority. Everybody talks about silent majority. Well, if you're a majority, you wouldn't be silent. So until you prove you're the majority, with actually coming out and saying something, then I'm going to have to assume that the majority is the more vocal people who are causing this. So the culture as a whole, I'm saying, becomes the kryptonite to our pastor who doesn't want to ruffle those feathers. Talked about that earlier with the cultural narrative. They don't want to. There's a chance somebody in the congregation, probably a lot of people, if we start going opposite of what the culture is feeding us, we start fasting what culture feeds, then we got us a big problem, right? So it's almost like we got to go the other direction. It weakens our message if we're so concerned about what culture is going to say, how they're going to evaluate, who's going to cancel us on social media. Oh no, our business will die if we get canceled on social media. So that's what I think is a second barrier to really deploying our resources from the pulpit, throwing those bombshells out there. The last one, we're averse to the Alamo. South Texas, we know what that is. Hopefully you guys know what that is across the country. We have pastors that are not willing to get in this fortress, their Alamo, which is their church building. We're averse to getting in that Alamo and hunkering down and saying, come get us. We're not moving on these issues. We're not moving. We're unshakable on certain issues that are plaguing society right now. I listed them earlier. You guys know what they are. I probably left some out. Those are the big 4 or 5 to me. Why are we averse to creating our Alamo within the buildings of our church or the walls of our church? Why? As congregation, we're responsible for that too. It's not just a guy on an island who's got pastor on his business card. It's not just him. It's his leadership staff. It's us as lay people in the church. We got to lock arms. We got to get together and we got to guard this thing. We're in the fortress that is our Alamo, our church building with us in it. We are the church, right? The body of Christ. We're responsible to take up our sword, right? To get on the wall and defend and make a stand and reinforce and support a message that our shepherd, pastor, shepherding his flock that he does, we've got to support that. So if we're averse to the Alamo, we're just coming in willy-nilly every Sunday, maybe every other Sunday. Some of you maybe on major holidays when you get drugged to church. I don't know. I'd like to think our audience is faithful in their walk with Christ. They're faithful in, meeting and worshiping together corporately. The Bible says, do not forsake the gathering of the saints, right? But we all have to be ready to lock in, dig our feet in to the ground and not move. This is our Alamo. This is the hill worth dying on. So let's be a part of this message. Let's support and encourage our pastors to have the courage to talk about these issues. Because again, someone's going to feed it to us. And I'd much rather have it be him if he's lined up and he's scriptural and he's hearing from the Lord. He's not going off on a tangent on his own flesh or his own ideals. He's got an impartation. The Holy Spirit has led him to deliver a message about these topics. I wonder if our pastors are even praying about guidance on whether they should talk about these things from the pulpit. Some are doing it, like I said, but the ones that aren't, I would challenge them. I would challenge you to challenge them, your pastor, if he's not, challenge them to pray about it at the very least. So we got to dig our feet in, create our Alamo, and stand together. We got to stand for that. So that's it, man. I hope that was good for you guys. We're polarizing the pulpit. You have a responsibility. Your pastor has a responsibility. Get in his ear, talk to him about it, find out what the cost is, find out what the downside is to him, find out if he's got plans to pray about getting guidance to deliver those messages, and then see what God does. With that, be blessed.